Hi, Year 11. We're looking at Measure for Measure Act 4. The last three scenes of Act 4 are very short and action-packed, which is in contrast to the earlier acts of the play, in particular Act 2. But I'm hoping that I'll be able to get through it quite quickly because of that. So we start off in Angelo's house, and Angelo and Aeschylus are back in. So in terms of the setting, most of the play is set either in the prison or in the houses of state for people like Angelo and the Duke, where they receive supplicants. So Angelo and Aeschylus come in, and they're halfway through a conversation, and the he that they're talking about is the Duke. And they say that he's been sending these letters with instructions in them, and every letter that he sends has instructions that are confusing and that contradict the previous letter. And so Angelo says that the Duke has written in a most uneven and distracted manner. His actions show much like to madness. Pray heaven his wisdom be not tainted. And why meet him at the gates and redeliver our authorities there? So he's describing the quality of writing in the Duke's letters. It's uneven and distracted. It's like madness. And Angelo prays that the Duke hasn't actually become mad. And then he gives us some information that the Duke wants to meet them at the gates and hand over their power, their authority that they've had while the Duke was away at the gates, instead of waiting for the Duke to arrive back at his sort of castle and do the handing over of power there. And Aeschylus says, I don't know, I can't guess. And Angelo keeps asking these questions. Well, why should we tell everybody in the streets that an hour before the Duke enters, if they think that they've been treated unfairly while he's away, that they should come out into the street and talk to the Duke there? So that this is a way of Shakespeare giving us information about what the Duke has said in his letters without us having to actually read the letters, which would be quite boring on stage. So then Aeschylus says, oh, no, there's a good reason for that. This way, everyone will get their complaints over and done with, which means that no one, in 6 months' time can say that they were treated unfairly and will stand against us. And Angelo says, well, look, can you sort that out? Can you make sure everyone knows that that's what the Duke has said? And I'll come and get you in the morning when it's time to meet him. And Aeschylus says, no problem, see you later. Angelo says good night, and then he's left with his soliloquy at the end. And he says, this deed unshapes me quiet, makes me unpregnant and dull to all proceedings, a deflowered maid, and by an eminent body that enforce the law against it. But that her tender shame will not proclaim against her maiden loss, how might she tongue me? Yet reason dares her no, for my authority bears of a credent bulk that no particular scandal once can touch, but it confounds the breather. He should have lived, save that riotous youth with dangerous sense might, in the times to have come, taken revenge, by so receiving a dishonoured life with a ransom of such shame. Would yet he had lived! Alack, when once our grace we have forgot, nothing goes right. We would and we would not. So what he's talking about there, he starts by saying, this deed unshapes me quiet. When he says this deed, he's talking about the act of adultery that he thinks that he committed last night with Isabella. We know it was really Mariana, but we can see that now that he has committed the act, he regrets it. So he says that it's unshaped him, and he's just saying that it's made him distracted and unfocused, but he uses, quite ironically, the term unpregnant, which in this situation is probably not the most appropriate term to use. And then he exclaims about who he thinks is Isabella, a deflowered maid, and by an eminent body that enforced the law against it. So he's saying how dreadful it is that he's taken Isabella's virginity, and then that because he was in a position of power, he's an eminent body who should have been carrying out the law. It's really bad that he was the one to do it. And he also uses the word there, enforced, which is interesting because it does have the connotations of rape or coercion. So along with the exclamations that he's got throughout this speech, it suggests that really strong sense of remorse and shame that he really regrets giving in to the temptation. Then he says, "But that her tender shame will not proclaim against her maiden loss, how might she tongue me?" So he's basically saying that he thinks that she will be too ashamed of what has happened, so she won't speak out. But he says she could really use her words to bring me down. And then he says, "No, reason dares her no, for my authority bears of a credent bulk that no particular scandal once can touch, but it confounds the breather." So this is what he told Isabella when he initially propositioned her. He said, "You can tell people, but no one's going to believe you. They're going to judge you badly for saying it, not me badly, because they won't believe that it ever happened." And then he changes the topic. So he changes the topic here. He says, "He should have lived, save that riotous youth with dangerous sense might in the times to come have taken revenge, by so receiving a dishonoured life with ransom of such shame." So this is him giving the reason why he went back on his word and had Claudio killed, instead of at least being honourable enough that if he was going to commit adultery and break the law that he was upholding, that he would at least not be a hypocrite and therefore let Claudio go, and hold fast to the promise that he made Isabella. So he says, well, he should have lived, except because he's young and he is dangerous, therefore, he might have decided that he needed revenge against me and killed me for dishonouring his sister in order to save his own life. So that's why he killed Claudio. And then he again laments, "Would yet he had lived, I wish I hadn't killed him." And then he ends with a rhyming couplet. So don't forget, Shakespeare uses rhyme to show us what's really important. And this is, "Alack, when once our grace we have forgot, nothing goes right. We would and we would not." So that's got the moral message of Angelo's character, really. And it's a biblical allusion to Romans 7:19. And basically it just means that we often do evil which we don't want to do. When we have good intentions, we end up committing evil. Okay, on to scene 5, and we're in the fields outside of the town. And for one of the first times in the play, we've got Duke Vincentio in his own clothing, and a new character, Friar Peter. So the Duke says to the friar, "Can you give me these letters to me later at an appropriate moment? The provost knows what's going on. Make sure you stick to the plan no matter what happens. And can you get my friends to meet me at the entrance of the city to witness what happens and to provide my entourage?" So in particular, he says, when you bring my friends to the gate, make sure they bring trumpets. So it's showing that he wants to re-enter the city with a sense of authority. So in the same way that when he comes into this scene, he's wearing his own clothes for the first time, he's now building up and reassembling his appearance of power through all of the ways that he can, starting with the clothing, moving on to having rich, dignified friends around him when he reaches the front of the city, and having trumpets playing when he enters so that he seems quite important. And this is contextually relevant because King James I had just entered the city in great pomp and ceremony in order to take the throne. And so most people in London at this time would have seen that, and so would have understood that the Duke is just planning to re-enter the city, and that's what he's planning for. So the friar says, "Okay, I'll do it fast." And then Varius comes in, another new character. And the Duke says, "Oh, thank you for coming so quickly. Let's go for a walk because other friends are coming soon." Then the last scene in Act 4, we are in the street near the city gate, and Isabella and Mariana are there getting ready for the Duke to arrive. And we start halfway through a conversation again. And Isabella says, "To speak so indirectly I am loath, I would say the truth. So I don't want to lie. I would be quite happy to say that you were the one who slept with Angelo. But to accuse him so, that is your part, yet I am advised to do it," he says, "to baleful purpose." So he is a bit ambiguous. I think it's probably referring to the friar who is the Duke in disguise, although there are some critics who believe that it is Friar Peter. But basically it's just saying that they have been advised, probably by the Duke, that Isabella needs to be the one who says that she slept with Angelo in the orchard, in order to veil full purpose, so to conceal their aims. So that's quite an interesting and controversial reason. So I think that's worth thinking about, whether that fits in with your interpretation, that she should lie in order to kind of draw out Angelo and trap him. So it is that idea of hypocrisy and entrapment coming through, this idea that because Angelo has been immoral, they need to deal with him in an immoral way, basically. And Mariana says, I agree, just do what you've been told. And Isabella goes on top of that, he might argue against me in front of the Duke, and I shouldn't think that that's strange, because it's a medicine that's bitter to sweet end. So it's part of the long-term plan if he seems to disagree with me. And then this is quite a famous quote, it's bitter to sweet end. So basically it's saying that an immoral end justifies the means. Mariana starts to say something else, and then Isabella interrupts her because the friar has arrived. And the friar just says, I found you a place to stand so that you can speak to the Duke, so that he doesn't just walk right past you. The trumpets have already sounded twice, and the rich and dignified and important citizens have already gathered up near the gates. So that's probably the men who the Duke asked the friar to collect for him in the last scene. And he says, they're very near upon, the Duke is entering, quick, let's go, we've got to get into places. And then that's the lead up for the final scene of the play, where everything comes together and we have the truth revealed about Angelo and also the Duke.